I got to confess something. I think I might be kind of stuck in a rut.
Oh.
Like, literally, I order the same dish every time I go to my favorite Thai place. Pad See Ew. Always Pad See Ew. And don't even get me started on my music playlists. It's the same songs, like on repeat for months.
Well, that sounds awfully familiar. Maybe you're experiencing the mere exposure effect.
The what effect?
The mere exposure effect.
Okay, now you have to explain.
Okay, sure. So it's this psychological phenomenon where basically we tend to like develop a preference for things just because we're familiar with them. Basically, our brains kind of equate familiarity with, safety and enjoyment.
Hold on. So you're saying my Pad See Ew obsession isn't because it's the most delicious dish on the menu. It's just because, like, I've ordered it a million times.
It's definitely a possibility, but that's what we're diving into today.
Okay.
Exploring this whole mere exposure effect and how it shapes our preferences from what we eat to who we're friends with, all kinds of stuff. We've got a ton of research and real-world examples to unpack, so let's get to it.
All right, let's do it. First things first, can we break down exactly what this mere exposure effect is?
Sure.
In plain English for our listeners who might not be, psychology experts.
Absolutely. The mere exposure effect basically means that the more we're exposed to something, the more we tend to like it.
Oh, okay.
And get this, it can happen even if we don't consciously remember seeing it before.
So it's like our brains are secretly playing favorites.
Yeah.
Without us even realizing it. That's kind of sneaky.
Exactly. It's like a subconscious shortcut our brains take to make decisions in a world that's just overloaded with choices.
Okay, that makes sense.
Yeah.
But how do we even know this is a real thing?
Right.
Like, what kind of research backs this up?
Well, that's where Robert Zajonc comes in. He was a pioneer in this field back in the 1960s. And his research really put the mere exposure effect on the map.
Yeah.
He did a ton of studies using all sorts of stimuli, words, faces, even music. Wait, you said music. So you're telling me my love for, like, my go-to playlist could just be this mere exposure thing, and not because it's, like, actually filled with musical masterpieces?
Well, let's not discredit your taste in music just yet.
Okay.
But it is interesting to consider how much repeated exposure plays a role in our musical preferences.
Right.
Zajonc's research is pretty fascinating.
Yeah.
He even did an experiment using what were considered dirty words back then. Words that were considered taboo.
Okay, now that's a story I need to hear. Dirty words in psychology. This is getting good.
Right.
Yeah.
So he showed participants a list of words, some neutral and some taboo,
Okay.
with different frequencies.
Uh-huh.
And what he found was that the words that appeared more frequently were rated more positively
Interesting.
by the participants, even the dirty ones.
So simply seeing a word more often, even if it was, like, initially considered offensive, made people like it more. That's wild. It really highlights the power of repeated exposure.
For sure.
But, of course, there are counter-arguments to consider.
Oh.
Like the Pollyanna hypothesis.
Okay.
Which suggests that maybe we like familiar words because they tend to have, like, positive meanings.
So which is it? Do we like familiar words because they're positive? Or are they positive because they're familiar?
Yeah, that's a great question.
It's like a chicken or the egg situation.
Exactly. It's a complex interplay between, exposure and inherent meaning. And more research is needed to fully untangle it.
Wow. This is already getting complicated.
Yeah.
But I can't help but wonder how this all plays out, like, in our relationships.
Right.
Like, do we just end up befriending the people we see the most?
Yeah.
Because of this, like, mere exposure thing?
It's definitely a factor.
Okay.
Think about it.
Yeah.
You're more likely to become friends with people you see often, right?
It's true.
Proximity breeds familiarity, and familiarity, well, often breeds liking.
That makes a lot of sense. I'm definitely closer to the people I see every day at work compared to, like, someone I only run into once in a blue moon.
Right.
Yeah.
So this mere exposure effect could be, like, subtly shaping our entire social circle, influencing who we become friends with, who we develop crushes on, even who we consider our closest confidants.
Okay, this is blowing my mind. And you mentioned music earlier. I'm a huge music fan, so I have to know more about this. Do certain types of music benefit more from repeated exposure?
That's where things get a bit tricky.
Uh-oh.
Some studies show that repeated exposure to a song, well, it leads to liking it more.
Okay.
While others, particularly those using simpler tunes, show the opposite.
Wait, so listening to the same song on repeat could make me dislike it.
Yeah, it's a possibility.
My teenage self, who blasted the same pop song for weeks on end, is freaking out right now.
It seems like complexity plays a role here.
Mm.
Simple tunes might become grating after repeated exposure,
Right.
while, more complex pieces might reveal new layers with each listen.
That actually makes sense. I've definitely gotten sick of catchy but repetitive jingles before.
Sure.
But before we go down too many rabbit holes, I think it's important to clarify.
Yeah.
This mere exposure effect isn't like a one-size-fits-all kind of thing, right?
Absolutely, and that's what's so fascinating about it. There are all these different factors that can influence how strong the effect is.
Okay.
And how it plays out.
Mm.
Things like, the type of stimulus, how it's presented, even how we measure liking.
So there's more to it than just see it more, like it more.
Definitely. For example, the initial familiarity of something matters.
Okay.
If you're already familiar with something, repeated exposure might not have as big of an impact.
That makes sense. I mean, I'm already pretty familiar with pizza, so seeing another pizza ad probably won't make me crave it any more than I already do.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And the complexity of the stimulus comes into play too. Remember how simple tunes could become annoying with repetition?
Yeah.
The same goes for other stimuli. Simple things might bore us more quickly.
Okay. So complexity matters. What about recognizability? Do we have to consciously remember seeing something for the mere exposure effect to kick in?
That's actually a point of debate among researchers. Some studies suggest that conscious recognition isn't necessary, while others argue it plays a key role.
Uh-huh.
More research is definitely needed to fully understand this.
Wow, it's like our brains are operating on this subconscious level, secretly influencing our preferences without us even realizing it.
Right.
Okay, I'm ready for some more real-world examples. This stuff is just too good.
All right. Let's talk about art and architecture.
Okay.
Have you ever heard the story of the Eiffel Tower?
Ooh, I have a feeling this is a good one.
So when it was first built, Parisians hated it.
What?
They thought it was an eyesore, this monstrous metal structure that just ruined the city's skyline. Seriously, that's so hard to imagine. The Eiffel Tower is the symbol of Paris. I can't imagine anyone disliking it now.
I know, right? But over time, as people saw it more and more,
Yeah.
their opinions started to change. Now it's one of the most beloved landmarks in the world, a symbol of romance and beauty.
So could that be the mere exposure effect in action? People saw it so much that they just started to like it.
It's definitely a strong possibility. The Eiffel Tower went from reviled to revered simply by becoming a familiar fixture in the Parisian landscape.
That's crazy.
It makes you wonder, what if people had torn it down back then just because it was, initially unpopular?
That's a scary thought. And it makes me think about how our perceptions of art in general, can change over time.
Uh-huh.
Impressionism was considered scandalous when it first emerged, but now it's a staple in museums around the world.
Exactly.
What was once shocking and unfamiliar can become appreciated and sought after, simply through repeated exposure. It challenges us to reconsider our initial reactions to art and how they might be influenced by, mere unfamiliarity.
That's a good point.
What if the things we initially dislike could become our favorites? With more exposure.
This is blowing my mind.
Yeah.
But we can't forget about the elephant in the room here. Where does advertising fit into all of this?
Ah, yes. Advertising. This is where the mere exposure effect goes into overdrive.
I knew it.
Marketers use it all the time to make us their brands and products.
I knew it.
Yeah.
There's a reason why I see the same commercials a million times. It's they're subtly brainwashing us with familiarity.
Well, it's not necessarily about brainwashing, but it's definitely about creating positive associations through repeated exposure.
Oh.
One of our sources, a study by Januszewski, found that even brief unconscious exposure to a brand name or product can lead to increased liking.
So even if I don't actually remember seeing a logo on a billboard, it could still be influencing my choices later on?
Precisely. It's all about creating that sense of familiarity. Now, Jan Wastowski's research also dives into some more technical stuff, like pre-attentive processing, which basically means our brains are actually processing information even before we're consciously aware of it. Imagine, you're driving down the highway and you see a billboard kind of in your peripheral vision. You might not even register it consciously, but your brain is still taking it in.
Right.
And that can have an impact on your later preferences.
Okay, so even our subconscious minds aren't safe from the clutches of advertising. Our poor brains don't stand a chance. But seriously, this is making me wonder, like, how much of what we think we like is actually just a result of this unconscious bias?
That's a great question, and it's something definitely worth pondering. But I think it's important to remember that, the mere exposure effect isn't inherently, like, good or bad.
Okay.
It's just a tool. And, like, any tool can be used for different purposes.
Right. So it's like a double-edged sword. It can help us, like, navigate a world overflowing with choices.
Exactly.
But it can also keep us stuck in a rut.
The same mechanism that helps us find comfort and security in familiar things can also lead us to miss out on, new and potentially amazing experiences.
Okay, I'm starting to see the potential downsides here. It's like my pad CU obsession might be keeping me from discovering my true Thai food soulmate.
Precisely. And it's not just about food, right?
Oh, right.
This bias can influence our relationships, our careers, our travel choices.
Yeah.
It can even make us resistant to, like, new ideas and technologies.
So the comfort and certainty that come with familiarity can actually hold us back. That's a bit of a bummer. But then how do we break free from this familiarity bubble without, like, giving up on all the good things about, familiar comforts? It's a bit of a dilemma.
You hit the nail on the head. It's all about finding that sweet spot, that balance between, the comfort of the familiar and the excitement of the new.
Okay, but how do we actually do that? Give us the practical tips. How can we harness the mere exposure effect for good without letting it, like, control our lives?
Well, the first step is awareness.
Okay.
Simply recognizing that this bias exists
Yeah.
and that it can influence our decisions, often subconsciously,
Okay.
is huge.
So being mindful of our tendency to gravitate towards the familiar is a good starting point.
Yeah.
Basically just like acknowledging that this mere exposure thing is happening in our brains.
Exactly. Once we're aware of it, we can start to challenge ourselves to, step outside of our comfort zones.
Easier said than done.
Yeah.
I'm already feeling resistance from my inner pad CU lover.
I get it. But even small changes can make a big difference.
Okay.
Try a new coffee shop.
Okay.
Listen to a different genre of music.
Uh-huh.
Strike up a conversation with someone you wouldn't normally talk to. Small steps.
Okay, those are manageable steps. I can get behind that. What else can we do to, like, break free from this grip of familiarity? What if some of our listeners are feeling, like, really stuck?
Think about the areas of your life where you feel the most stuck.
Okay.
Is it your entertainment choices? Your social circle? Your career?
Yeah.
Once you've identified those areas, make a conscious effort to, diversify your experiences.
So it's about actively seeking out novelty, even when it feels a little uncomfortable.
Exactly. Challenge your assumptions. What you think you dislike might actually surprise you if you give it a fair chance. Remember, you don't have to love everything new you try. The goal is to expand your horizons and challenge those preconceived notions that might be, holding you back.
This is making me think about those food challenge shows where people try all sorts of, like, bizarre and exotic dishes.
Yeah.
There's definitely a lesson to be learned there.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Stepping outside of our comfort zones, even in small ways, can expand our palettes, our perspectives, and our possibilities.
I love it. Okay, so we've talked about the downsides of the mere exposure effect.
Right.
And how to, like, break free from those negative patterns.
Yeah.
But we can't forget about the good aspects of familiarity, right?
Yeah.
There's a reason why I keep going back to my favorite Thai restaurant. It's not just the pad CU. It's the, friendly staff, the cozy atmosphere, the familiar, like, smells and sound. It feels like a home away from home.
Exactly. Those feelings of comfort and belonging are incredibly valuable. They reduce stress, boost our mood, make us feel connected to the world around us. Familiar things and routines can be incredibly grounding.
So it's not about, like, eliminating familiarity altogether.
Right.
It's about finding a healthy balance between the known and the unknown. Kind of like finding that perfect ratio of sweet and spicy in a dish.
I love that analogy.
Yeah.
We need the comfort of the familiar to ground us.
Right.
But we also need the excitement of the new to keep us, growing and evolving.
This is making me think about my travel habits. I tend to gravitate towards places I've been before where I know what to expect. But maybe I need to push myself to explore some uncharted territory. I mean, what if I'm missing out on my dream destination just because I'm too comfortable with the familiar?
That's the spirit. Think of it as an adventure, right? You might discover your new favorite destination. Or you might learn something unexpected about yourself along the way.
Challenge accepted. I'm
Okay.
officially adding embrace the unknown to my to-do list. But, even with all this talk about, like, breaking free from routines, there are some things I'm just not willing to give up, like my morning coffee ritual. I have a very specific way of making my coffee, and I'm not sure I'm ready to, like, mess with perfection.
I totally understand. There's nothing wrong with cherishing certain routines, especially if they, bring you joy and comfort. The key is to be intentional
Hmm.
about which routines you keep and which ones you challenge.
So it's about finding that sweet spot between, like, the comfort of familiarity
Yeah.
and the thrill of the unknown, making conscious choices about what we want to keep in our lives and what we're ready to, let go of.
Precisely. It's about being the author of your own story,
Yeah.
choosing which aspects of your life you want to keep consistent and which ones you want to, like, shake up.
This has been such an eye-opening conversation. I'm feeling inspired to, like, break free from my routines and embrace the unknown. But I think we need to give our listeners, some practical tips on how to actually put all of this knowledge into action, beyond just try something new.
You're right. It's time to move from theory to practice.
Our listeners, let's get down to brass tacks here. We've explored the ins and outs of the mere exposure effect, the good, the bad, the in-between. But now, like, how can we actually use this knowledge to level up our lives?
I think a good starting point is maybe shifting our perspective on that, like, initial discomfort we often feel when we're trying something new.
Yep.
Instead of seeing it as, a red flag. What if we viewed it as a sign that our brains are, like, learning, stretching, and expanding?
Ooh, I like that. So that feeling of, like, I don't know about this,
Yeah.
could actually be a signal that I'm pushing myself beyond my usual boundaries, maybe even, like, growing a bit.
Exactly. The more we venture outside our comfort zones, the wider those zones become. It's like uh, building mental muscle.
I'm all for building mental muscle.
What once felt daunting can become, the new normal.
Okay, so instead of saying, I hate trying new foods,
Right.
maybe I should be saying, my taste buds are on an adventure.
I love that. And remember, this applies to so much more than just food, right?
Right.
Think about, your social life, your career, your hobbies.
Uh-huh.
Where could you use a little more adventure?
Okay, I'm ready for a challenge. Let's get specific. What's one tangible thing our listeners can do this week
Okay.
to, like, break free from those familiar patterns?
How about this? Choose one activity you've always been curious about, but maybe a bit intimidated by. It could be anything, right? Like joining a dance class, trying a new recipe, or even just, striking up a conversation with someone you wouldn't normally talk to.
I like it. It's specific, actionable, and, let's be honest, a little bit scary, which means it's probably good for us.
Exactly. The key is to make it, small enough that it feels doable,
Right.
but challenging enough to push you just a little bit outside that comfort zone.
No bungee jumping required. Unless our listeners are feeling extra adventurous, of course.
Right. And remember, the goal isn't necessarily to, like, love the new experience.
Yeah.
It's about, expanding your horizons.
Yes.
And becoming more comfortable with the unfamiliar. Who knows, you might even discover something you truly enjoy.
This is making me think about all the times I've, like, written something off without giving it a fair chance, all because it seemed, too different.
Yeah.
Or unfamiliar. I probably missed out on some hidden gems because of my own mere exposure bias.
It happens to the best of us. We all have those blind spots, right? But by understanding this bias, we can start to eliminate those areas and make more intentional choices.
I'm suddenly feeling a renewed sense of curiosity about the world.
Yeah.
But let's be realistic. It's not always easy to break out of our routines, especially when, life gets busy.
Absolutely. That's where mindfulness comes in.
Okay.
Pay attention to those moments. When the mere exposure effect is, pulling you back towards the familiar,
Uh-huh.
ask yourself, am I choosing this because it's truly what I want?
Right.
Or am I just on autopilot?
So it's about checking in with ourselves, being present in the moment, and making intentional choices rather than letting our brains, run on autopilot.
Yeah.
Tuning into our own preferences rather than letting familiarity, like, dictate them.
Exactly. And be kind to yourself.
Okay.
Don't beat yourself up if you fall back into, old habits.
Yeah.
Change takes time and effort. The important thing is to keep practicing, keep experimenting, and keep, nudging yourself outside that comfort zone.
I feel like we've covered so much ground today. I'm walking away with a whole new appreciation for, like, the power of familiarity and the importance of embracing the unfamiliar. Any final nuggets of wisdom for our listeners before we wrap up?
Remember, The world is brimming with, amazing experiences, both familiar and unfamiliar.
Mm.
Don't let the mere exposure effect limit you. Challenge yourself this week. Try something new, explore uncharted territory, and who knows, maybe you'll discover a hidden passion, a new perspective, or even a whole new side of yourself.
Beautifully said. On that note, we'll leave you to your adventures. Until next time, keep diving deep, and don't be afraid to get a little uncomfortable along the way.